Kid Speed. Today we're going to be assembling this Mototec X3 125cc kids dirt bike. Before we start, I just want to say this video is for entertainment purposes only. I consider myself a part of the Mototec community. I wanted to put this together as people struggle to put it together, and I think there could be safety issues if things aren't done correctly. So please feel free to contribute and be part of that community. If there's something you see here that you say, I would have done that a little bit differently, or I would have done that completely differently, please reach out to me, comment below, and let's try and make this the safest riding experience and the most fun we can have for everyone. Thanks for watching. And I've created the bike and set out all the parts and pieces that we're going to need to speed this video up a little bit. I've taken the owner's manual, the handlebar padding, the little cover for that, and the breather hose. I've put them in a Ziploc bag. We're going to need those later, but I'm going to set those aside. We had to take this front axle bolt off to get the bike out of the crate, and we set it down nicely on the cardboard here. So that's going to be one of our first steps, getting this front wheel on. And to do that, you need a 17mm wrench for one side, and I choose to use a 19mm socket for the other side. We have a rear shock bolt back here, which you'll need a 14mm and a 13mm. I choose to use a 13mm socket and a 14mm wrench to do that one up, as well as a extension bar. For the handlebars, the handlebar mounts, you're going to need a 6mm hex wrench to do those up. All right, let's get to it. Like all of these builds, they're much easier if you have a friend that can help you. But if you're like me and you're doing a lot of these builds by yourself for whatever reason, one of the things I like to do is get some cardboard and get a motorcycle or ATV jack and sit it under the front here to lift this up. Again, you can lift it up manually and kind of muscle it, but it makes it a lot easier if you can adjust the height of the bike and focus on feeding this axle bolt through. One of the first things that's in our way is the handlebars are still strapped on from shipping, so I'm going to uncrate those. Now, after you've done this a few times, it gets really easy, but you want to make sure the little green button, electric start button, is on the right hand side. And so there's a little move you do here, just twist these around like this. And this green button here is going to be on the right hand side if you were sitting on the bike, and you can set the handlebars right there. I am also going to cut off this front plate. I tend to leave this VIN tag on there as I'm going to be selling this bike. The other thing to do as well is cut these keys out of here. This is a step that I often forget and have to go back and do. So cut these keys out, and we will make sure they are appropriately set where we won't miss them. You can set this aside with your owner's manual. You can take this piece off as well, set that safely aside out of harm's way. While I'm at this angle too, one thing that confused me right up the front here is you've got this empty plug. So this is for an auxiliary. The key switch actually has 3 positions, on, and then for the auxiliary switch. So if you wanted to add a headlight or some other auxiliary power item, this is your switch. So don't worry, this is not something needed to assemble the bike or something you missed. We also have to take off the brake caliper. It's mounted in a certain way for shipping, so we're going to take these 2 bolts off here. I'm going to use an impact and a 10mm wrench to take this off. I'm going to have to cut that as well. Just a warning, don't do bolts of this size up again with an impact. Always do them by hand. And always start your bolts by hand. Don't start bolts with an impact, you're asking for trouble. But some of these little bolts, probably these ones will be okay, but some of them you can have issues either ruining the threads, or you can even snap some of the smaller ones if you use an impact. So you can see in there's a little gap between the brake pads. We're going to have to slide the brake disc from the wheel in between those when we mount that. So just keep that in mind. Sometimes you might have to use a screwdriver and separate that, just push these pistons back a little bit, but usually only a very small amount, if anything. Usually a little bit of wiggling will get you there without engaging the screwdriver. See here, our forks need to go through here. The bike's not high enough yet, so I'm gonna raise that up to a level that I think is gonna be where we wanna be, or at least close. This is where the jack comes in handy, because you can do this and control it pretty well. Here is your friendly axle bolt. You are gonna stick it in with this end going in first. You want your fattest of the two, and they're not that much different, but you're gonna want the biggest of the two spaces on the inside. So you will feed this through the front like this, then take the bigger of your two spaces and feed that in there. And then next step is just to feed that through so the spacer holds by itself in there. Then the next step is to feed this bolt through so it holds the wheel in place. Then your next step is to see if you can poke that bolt out enough out the other side. You can see that on the camera there, but that bolt is poking through. Get that next spacer in place, and then poke the bolt through that, and then get it through that final hole and out through the other side. Now this is a bolt that you probably don't want coming undone unintentionally. I utilize this thread locker orange. I'm not plugging any particular brand. I use the orange because you can still get it undone, but it's the strongest you'll get. That's kind of removable, and I make sure to get a good amount on this thread. Just twist that around. If anyone has any tips or suggestions on using thread locker or different or better ways to use it, please leave me a comment in the comments. I'm always learning, but this is the way that I've had success doing it. We want to put our washer on and get a little more thread locker on the bolt there. Sorry, on the nut there. And we're going to tighten that one right up. On the bolt side, you want this 17 millimeter. On this side, you want the 19 millimeter. Go ahead and tighten that up. I'm zoomed in on the front of the bike here, and we have our brake caliper here, if I can get it in shot, with our gap there. We're going to slide this gap over the top of this brake disc here, and I'm going to line it up with our bolts. Okay, so this is my brake caliper. I slid it behind here. You can see that's where one of the bolt holes is right there. One of them's up here. We're gonna line them up, and we're gonna put these bolts back in that we pulled out. With these, the threads, they're gonna bite it right at the end here, so you can just put a little on the end. And then you're going to want to tighten these ones by hand, and they're a 10 millimeter. Especially if you have the bike suspended. This one is pretty easy. You undo this by hand. You can see this bolt right here is the one I'm undoing. I'm going to take that out. I'm going to gently lift from a secure spot this shock up. I lift it up a little more until I could put that shock bolt easily in place. And then, with a little bit of finagling, you can get that bolt pushed through like that. Again, we'll put some thread locker on it and use a 14 and a 13 to tighten this up. You want your 14 on the nut side and your 13 on the bolt side, and you can go ahead and tighten that up. Now we have the least favorite part of the build for me is getting this peg footrest in the right place. So we have to start by pulling this cotter pin out of here. This large part goes over the top, and this other piece will sit underneath on the black there. So if I remember correctly, I have to slide this over the top like that. You can see that small pieces there. Spin this up and then magically slide this pin through without it falling all out on me. All right, that is through and your kickstand pin is on, and you put this cotter pin back in, face it down like this. And you're done with that piece. At this point too, you can lower the kickstand. I like to keep that plastic on there for protection. And you should be able to drop the bike gently down to the ground and on that kickstand. You can be done with the jack. So here are the handlebar mounts. The biggest thing you've got to know is that these aren't completely the same. There's a way they go and a way they don't. And you can see that this curve here is different to this curve here. So make sure you get them facing the same direction when you put them on. I'll show you when we get to that step. So you can separate these pieces and safely set them down. So we're gonna stick these in this front hole here with the steeper curve being towards the bike. It's really important we make sure the steeper curve there and not this more gentle curve. The steeper curve is towards the bike. We're going to go ahead and do those up with a hex wrench. We're going to use an 8mm hex wrench to tighten these up. So now's a good time to go ahead, get all this plastic tape and pieces off these handlebars before we go to put them on. We can start the process of putting these on. Now there's been several times where I've done this and forgot to put the key on. So we're going to start by just at least getting these secured on here with these just on a little bit. Then we'll take our key and we will mount that on there and get those bolts through there as well. The thing I'd say is just try and get this gap at the front and at the back even. It may take a little bit of time just to get those even as you're tightening those handlebars down. Make sure these are properly in the middle. There's some marks on the handlebars to guide you for that. And also make sure you have your key in place sitting on top there. Otherwise it doesn't go in properly. For the easy parts, get this fuel breather on here. It's a little tight, of course. Get that on there and push that all the way down. Now we just have our front plastics. We're going to take off these 4 bolts under here and this one up here. I recommend doing these bottom ones first, so we'll go ahead and do that. For whatever reason from the factory, they'll come, 2 of the nuts will have 2 washers on them and 2 of them will have no washers on them. Just spread them out evenly so you have 1 washer on each bolt. I don't know why they do that. I'm going to, as I put this up under here, we're going to use 4 of these holes to line up this here like this. The reason I suggested the socket wrench is you need to apply some upward pressure on these to try and get them started. They can be a little bit difficult. So you can find the first one, look through to see how to start that. Just get the first one started. That should help you out a lot as you go to do the other 3. As you're doing these up, do these up by hand. These bolts aren't really that strong. We'll get that last piece of plastic in and our bike is ready to go for now. Please see my other videos on changing the oil and adjusting the chain. Both things I highly recommend before riding the bike. Also check the owner's manual. It doesn't have great instructions on assembling the bike, but it does have some excellent instructions on maintenance, changing the oil, cleaning the air filter, the types of oil and things to use, as well as a detailed maintenance schedule. One of the most important pages here is on page 19 of this particular user manual, 18 and 19, the before riding checklist, the pre-ride inspection. This is something I strongly recommend. We carry pretty much every single part on this bike at kidspeedusa.com, from the handle grips down to bars. Check out our parts page at kidspeedusa.com so you can check out all the parts. They're really easy to get. They're warehoused here in the US.